Hello. Okay, cool. That works. Hi, guys. Welcome to Industry Week, or the latter half of Industry Week. Thank you for all making it through the lovely snow. Just before we start, I've got a few sort of announcements to make and to introduce, obviously, the lovely Murugiah. So there has been a last-minute sort of addition to Industry Week today. Obviously, a lot of you guys here will be graphics students. So later on today at 4 o'clock in Confetti X, there will be Chris Mackey, who is a strategic partner manager for YouTube. It's a rare chance to basically have a chat and listen to the journey of someone who works with really, really high-profile YouTubers and how they create their content and how they sort of develop their brand. And it's a really good chance to, once again, sort of utilize Industry Week to the very best that it can be. So that is at Confetti X at 4 o'clock until 6. Obviously, you guys are in or around the building until that time. So by all means, go onto the Industry Week website, sign up, or stick around, and then we can head over to that event later on today. Right now, we have the wonderful Murugiah, who is going to start his talk in a moment. So just before we do so, a little bit of a reminder, if there is a fire alarm, it will not be a drill. So please do make your way to the nearest fire exit, which you can see signposted above the doors. And the fire assembly point is just outside to the left of Metronome on Beck Street. So please do make your way if that alarm does go off. But overall, welcome to your session with Murugiah. He has got a fantastic talk lined up where he's going to be talking about his creative journey, his experiences with screen printing and graphic design. And there's also a little bit of kind of what he's all about, basically. He's going to sort of give all his secrets away, hopefully, and inspire you all. We'd love you sort of being with us this week. If you want to give something back to us, by all means, share stuff in terms of pictures or videos on Instagram with the hashtag IW23. If you do that, then you're in a chance of winning a lovely prize as of the end of the week. So you get something back as well. And we'd love to see your journey through this week as well. And just a reminder to all the HE first years in the room, there is that video challenge happening this week as well. So grab some pictures, grab some snaps, and please do sort of work around there if we can. Brill. So without any sort of further ado, we have Murugiah now, who's going to do a fantastic talk about his journey, which is called Searching.
Thank you very much. Oh, that's good. Okay. So hi, thank you very much for coming, and thank you to Confetti for inviting me to talk. My name's Murugiah. I'm an artist, illustrator, designer, architect. And I was born in England, raised in South Wales with parents from Sri Lanka, and I now live and work in London. I wanted to call this talk Searching because I am still and forever will be searching for my creative voice, continuing with experimenting with new ideas and looking for new things to introduce in my work. It's just a message of everybody is searching in their work. Even if they think they've got it all figured out, they're all looking for new things to kind of add into their work. So, you've heard my name a few times, but this is how you say it. Yes. So I make fine art paintings, both digital and on canvas and in sketchbooks. Kind of mixed media as well, so a combination of those for fine art paintings. I do film posters. These are all screen printed film posters and gig posters. I also work in collaboration with other artists and bands and brands, where I kind of work on different kinds of products. We've got a New Balance collaboration here, a collaboration with the band Newfound Glory, which is a band that I grew up listening to. Lucy and Yak, Grateful Dead. Film poster-wise and gig poster-wise, I think we've done lots of stuff for Marvel and Studio Ghibli and Grateful... where's the Grateful Dead one? Yeah, it's down there. Some of these are officially licensed. Very few are private commissions. I also tackle cover design. So most recently I did a subscriber cover for Empire magazine for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. And that was a bit of a kind of follow-up to my Spider-Man No Way Home cover for them the previous year, I think. newspaper covers and kind of like record covers, things like that. So my story so far is that when I was 17, 18, when I was about to kind of pick my university and the course that I wanted to do, I told my parents that I wanted to be an artist, and they very quickly said no. They said that they were quite worried about a career in the arts. They were concerned for me and my ability to kind of make a living from being an artist. So they asked me to pick a subject that was art adjacent, which had a kind of regular salary, one that a job that I could go to every day and kind of do a 9 to 5 in. They were not very aware of what a life in the arts was, being Sri Lankan parents coming from Sri Lanka to the UK. You know, my dad was a doctor. My brother's a doctor. It comes from this. They wanted me to do something like medicine or engineering or law, something that they were, found tangible. But we ended up settling with architecture, and I studied it for 7 years at Kingston University. It was a very long course, but I should be able to explain what I learned from it and how I applied it to the artwork I make today. So that course ended in 2011, I think, and that's when I started making, maybe 2012. That's when I started making art. I kind of quit the architecture and went, back to my roots and wanting to be an artist, an illustrator, a designer. And I did that for a year or two. I was making kind of fan art, things like the thing you see in this 2013 section. It was Quentin Tarantino screenplay covers, mixed in with the design of a Penguin classic. I was doing screen printed posters and kind of illustrations for magazines, but none of them stylistically held together. They were all very different because I was still figuring out what I wanted to do stylistically. And this carried on 2013, 14, 15. I was still figuring stuff out. Here in 2015, I'm using brighter colors. It seems a little bit more consistent, but still not at the same time. I'm using like a Where's Wally style for this Eastern Electrics poster I did. And that kind of style carried on a little bit. And now I'm kind of going into applying some shading in 2017 and kind of maybe things are getting a bit better stylistically. Maybe I'm feeling a bit okay. And then in 2019, I'd had enough of that and just went all out on the kind of color, shade, and psychedelia and went nuts with it. And even still here, there's a lack of consistency from my point of view. And I at this point in time, I was getting quite down with my work. I was getting quite upset with the fact that it didn't feel uniquely me. It didn't feel authentically me. This is all stuff that was inspired by and linked to intellectual property, things like Spider-Man and Stranger Things and Billie Eilish and stuff. And it was kind of, because I was working for different types of intellectual property, I wasn't able to find myself in that work. I was always reliant on the thing I was making it for. So I had enough, and in 2020, in 2019 when COVID struck, I used the opportunity to redevelop the style. I was really at a low point, and I was like, what am I going to do? And I was asking myself some questions, which I normally get asked quite a lot. Where are you really from? And I was kind of thinking about the things I was interested in stylistically during this time and how they could be applied to the work. I grew up watching kind of psychedelic movies and kind of like Disney films and all sorts of, I've watched X-Men cartoons from the 90s and things like that. And I was always really interested in sci-fi and psychedelia and bright colors, which was shown previously in the work that I had done, but not consistently. So stylistically, I was kind of interested in all this stuff on this slide. You see there's West African masquerade, there's sci-fi novels, there's mythology, architecture still. So I kind of took all of this in 2020 and kind of applied this to the way I wanted to move forward with my style. And I then had to bring something more unique than just something like a style. I had to have a reason for making the work. I had to have meaning behind it. So then I had to figure out the meaning, basically. What am I interested in from a personal level, from my heart? And what do I focus on in my own daily life? What do I think about? I think about things like my own mental health. I think about climate change. I think about surrealism and mysticism and how those kind of things can affect the mind and the body. So I was doing that, and I was thinking about these two things. I was trying to kind of figure out what's the best way to combine all of these things. And looking back at my previous work, I had agreed with myself that I was interested in color, bright color. I was interested in composition, busy compositions. I tend to enjoy putting a lot of stuff on the page. And then that unique element of how to kind of incorporate these two ideas was my Sri Lankan heritage. How can I start to incorporate elements from my heritage into the way I was brought up in the West? And this was the kind of thing that I ended up figuring out. Ultimately, I wanted to imagine a world, like an environment where someone like me could be happy, someone who struggles with their mental health, someone who thinks about, climate change and Buddhism and mysticism, all this stuff. How could I be happy in this environment that I designed moving forward? So this is what I started coming up with in 2020. I was trying to be a bit more consistent and trying to be a bit more restrained with how I did things. I gave myself a few rules, a few lessons. Make busy compositions. Really figure out how to understand positive and negative space, a thing I learned during my architectural education. Use bright colors. Don't necessarily use exactly the same colors all the way through, but just use bright ones. Keep it somewhat consistent. If you're going to use a yellow, in your next piece, use the same yellow. And slowly over the COVID period, I was making a personal piece of work every week, just one a week. I wasn't concerned with the overall final output. I just wanted to make this piece of work per week and put it on social media. And slowly over those 2 years of lockdown, I think it was 2 years, I started to get commissions. I started to get people paying attention to the work. And I think it was because of this somewhat consistent, amount of work that was coming about. I had also, obviously, from 2013 up till now, built a couple of clients, a following as well. It's taken a lot of time to kind of figure this stuff out. Gosh, I've rushed through this incredibly quickly, so I apologize. I'm opening up for questions after the talk, by the way, so please ask loads of questions. So yeah, this was the kind of process that helped me get through COVID and to figure out my style. But this stuff took a long time. As you can see, 2013 all the way up to 2019. It was a long, slow process of figuring out what to do stylistically. And the reason I've kind of come to you today to talk is that you can kind of skip this stuff if you figure out this stuff first. Because then you'll be at least starting from a point of this, and then you can build from there. So having this kind of level of consistency while also introducing personal ideas into the work is something that you can do and kind of build your artistic voice quite quickly. So I just wanted to run through some of these pieces here, like this one. I'm going to point to it. This one here. It's my take on Silver Surfer and the Galactus. Galactus and the Silver Surfer, if you can believe it. It's kind of like there's a character surfing a surfboard and they're in front of this giant mask. But the giant mask is a Sri Lankan Raksha mask. And the surfer is dressed like one of my favorite characters from a weird movie from the 70s called The Holy Mountain. He's dressed with this Pharrell Williams top hat and a cape, you know. So I kind of, and then the dancers in the corner are from a West African masquerade image that I saw. So right here in this image, I'm combining all sorts of different ideas, but adding that element of personality and something that's unique to me, my Sri Lankan heritage, and applying it to a piece of artwork. I believe the Sri Lankan text either side, the Tamil language either side, speak to what the contents of the image is. They say herald in two different ways. So even here, I'm kind of incorporating typography into the work just because I'm interested in applying lots of different, graphical elements to the pieces. So those are the kind of things that I was building. The one next to it, the tall one with the lady in the middle with the Yeezy foam runners on for some reason, is my take on a broadsheet cover, a newspaper broadsheet, a tall, thin one, the title at the top. I think the title at the top just says illustrated, but because I'm using a different language, it kind of like appears to be something more interesting. And I'm just playing with different themes and ideas, and I'm kind of having the character's tattoos kind of come from her arm and get it turning into a part of the graphical piece of the image. These are the kind of jobs that then got me things like the Grateful Dead poster on the far right and the Anorak magazine cover. So I did this for a couple of years, and then I started to get more and more work in this style. I think I have some case studies. So I don't know if you know this image, but this is the lead character of A Clockwork Orange. And I was asked to design a screen-printed film poster licensed by the Stanley Kubrick estate for A Clockwork Orange. And the first thing I did was look at what was already out there. There seems to be a kind of theme running through all of these images, and it's the use of orange, white, and black, or off-white. So my first rule to myself was, don't do this at all. Do something completely different. Try and figure out a new thing that you can offer to the world of Clockwork Orange. So I immediately went to the only other thing that I researched to do with A Clockwork Orange that wasn't done in these colors, which was, this is what I was mentioning. How can I offer my authentic self to this work? Thinking about my busy compositions, my use of color, how can I apply that to the work? So the original book cover is the only thing that I found that had a different set of colors. So I then applied those to the design of the poster. And I don't have the line work and the build-up of this drawing, but I can talk you through it. So the way I designed this poster was the first thing I did was put a giant A in the middle of the poster. And I don't know if you can see it, but it's the point at the top that leads down to create a framing for the poster. And then I started to think, because of my architectural background, the way I look at the world is architecturally. I always see architectural elements. I see staircases. I see building facades, windows. So in the film, there was a very memorable thing from that movie, from my point of view, which was this checkerboard floor and the staircase of the writer's room in the film. So that was the next element I started to put in. And then slowly and slowly over time, I was building and building smaller elements as I went. I had sketched this out on paper first, and then I started to kind of scan that sketch in and then work on top of it digitally and then refine it over a long period of time to create this poster. And my way of incorporating these boxes and elements and smaller things and kind of details, it all came from the personal work I was doing for the previous 2 years. I was experimenting with all of this type of stuff for 2 years before I even applied it to a commercial illustration or a project or a job that I'd been hired to do. So I spent a lot of time figuring out composition before I could then apply this compositional style to a film poster. The next case study is from Saatchi & Saatchi. They initially hired me to do a pitch for Direct Line, which I think is, I don't know what Direct Line does anymore, insurance. Anyway, it was a failed pitch. I tried it, I didn't get the job. And then they called me back a couple of weeks later and they asked me to design a mural for their office. So don't ever get disheartened by failed things, projects that may not work out. If you're building a good relationship with your clients, with your collaborators, they are treating you with respect. They will always come back. I think personally, they'll always come back, and you can figure out something else to work on together. The brief was really waffly and just a lot, so I ignored most of it. But they asked me to design a mural that represented modern Britain. That was the only thing I took from the brief. I wasn't really that concerned with the rest of the stuff because I represent someone who's a modern British person. The fact that I'm from a diverse background, the fact that I'm, part Sri Lankan, part English, I already represent that. So I can ignore this entire brief because me doing it is that diversity that they were after. It was my way of just ignoring all that stuff and just doing whatever I wanted. So they gave me 3 different sites to choose from. And there was this one on the left here, which was the first site that you would see when you came into the office if you were a client or a potential customer of Saatchi & Saatchi. So that was a really big space. And then there was this one in the middle here, which was a tall kind of hangout area for members of the team. And then there was this one, the third one, which was down some stairs, and it was the wall that was in front of the gym. So how you look at that wall is you'd be in the gym, on your cycling machine or whatever. So 3 very different options, 3 different choices for a site, and it was up to me I had first choice, which was very kind of Saatchi & Saatchi. They gave me the choice to pick one, and I immediately went for the one that was the most difficult one, which was the tall space in the middle. It's 4 stories high by 2 meters wide. It's a ridiculous space. I wouldn't have known how to do the mural physically, or anything. I just knew that space would be the most impactful, even though it wasn't the first one you see when you come into the office. Just because of the proportions of it, I knew it would be, a fun one. So I do have a line drawing of this one. So we started out, I used a lot of the characters I had developed over my personal work for this mural because the brief was so open. It was do whatever you want. We're kind of trying to talk about modern Britain. I was like, fine. So I had lots of characters kind of ascending platforms, I had sunshines, I had things that loosely represented positivity and diversity through my own character design. And again, all of this stuff was built over a long period of time, 2 years worth of figuring out these characters and these drawings. And then as we went along, Saatchi were like, can we include the ampersand in the mural because it's part of their name, Saatchi & Saatchi. And then I said, I can do you one better. I can include the S and S in the mural. So in the final design, if you look hard enough, you'll be able to see a small S, an ampersand, and then a large S. And it's all growing from the bottom. So I then, by the end of the project, I was able to talk about the initial brief that they'd asked me for after doing the work. It's not something I would recommend, but it was a way to get over a really big, complicated project first, and then figure out how it linked back to the brief beforehand. And this is some shots of the mural through a window from the side, and kind of like we ended up doing a vinyl for the mural because we weren't able to get the health and safety precautions in order to paint it. You know, we had to get I would have had to have gotten on a cherry picker or, you know, to do this thing. So we ended up settling for vinyl. And this is stuff that I came up with afterwards because it doesn't really... You can just, you know... I had learned from previous years working with clients where if I didn't have a strong voice to begin with, I would have been bowled over by the client. I would have let the client decide how the project would go. Whereas this time around, I had spent the years figuring out my voice and figuring out my style and my choices behind my work so that I can tell the client what to do. I can tell the client, this is what represents modern Britain to me. And we obviously do this in the sketch stages. They have every opportunity to kind of, you know, amend it and say yes or no. Yes. So the title of the talk was Searching, because I am constantly searching for new ways of working, for my own voice. It's a constant... it's not a struggle. It's an enjoyable process to kind of look for new things in your work. But the result of that is creative freedom. It's kind of because you're able to build your own style and kind of design your own characters and kind of work within this world that you've designed, you have creative freedom. You can apply that to anything. I'm going to go back to... I'm going to go back real quick to my movie posters. So, as you can see, some of these film posters have got some of those characters and designs in them, and some of them don't. But all of them have the same stylistic approach. It's all composition. It's all figuring out positive and negative space, and then finding a way to draw characters from these properties in my way, once again, because I had built my style first. So, yeah, once you figure out that kind of style and kind of your creative voice, you can apply it to so many different things, like these film posters. I'm going to run back to the end of the talk. Apologies for the quick fire. Oh yeah, this is me running my path to creative freedom in the world that I've designed for myself. One that's incredibly psychedelic and weird and colorful, because I, as a person, find it very difficult to kind of interact with situations that are negative, that are difficult. I always want to make people happy. It's another thing that's part of my personality. It's this emotional thing that I put into the work, and I manifested it through bright colors. So there's always a strong meaning behind everything I do, even though it may not appear so. I'm going to end with this array of work on the screen so that you can all kind of have a look and take the time to ask me as many questions as you want. I wanted this talk to be a conversation between all of you and myself, so I'm going to open the floor to conversation. So please ask any questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Murugiah. That was amazing. Some really nice work on display there. Has anyone in the audience got any questions that they want to fire towards Murugiah in terms of his work, his journey, his style, anything like that? If you just want to put your hand up as high as you can, and then Matt will run that mic across to you.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming. First of all, your work looks absolutely amazing, not that you need me to say that. So,
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, part of your talk was so much about having your own style. Isn't that constraining? Like, isn't that a sending away some other potential clients, or I don't know, doesn't that feel constraining? Isn't that a bit like saying, this is my box, this is where I'm sitting, I'm not moving away, if you want this, come and get me, if not, then that's fine.
I hope I didn't make it sound too constraining, but I think once you have a style this style is not as finite, not as specific as others can be. I am open to doing all sorts of different projects, and I think you can restrain yourself a little bit, because it's better to work on something, on a specific set of projects in a unique way, than to work on every single kind of project in a generic way. Do you know what I mean? Like, I reckon I could probably do work for many, many different kinds of clients with this style. But there are also some clients that I wouldn't be able to work with because of this style. But that's okay with me, because I think if I can apply this work to anything, I guess the big example of that is the film posters. I could tackle any film, but because the voice and the approach to it is unique, it presents itself as something new. I wouldn't be too constrained about worrying about different clients and kind of whether your style would be wrong for them, because it will be right for so many others. I hope that's answered your question.
Well, we have one just over there.
I'm not really sure if this is a question. First of all, I just wanted to thank you, and I really appreciated when you put that statement in your slide about, no, but really, where are you from? I see that, like, from my perspective as somebody who is what represents modern Britain, it can be quite constraining always having those kind of questions thrown at you. So how did you navigate that? And did you find that by finding your own truth and what you represent, is that really influenced, like, now in your work, so you feel like you can take up space and you can be in those rooms and say, like, this is who I am, this is what I do, and respectfully, if this is what you want, then I can do that?
Yes, the answer is yes. It took a very long time to figure that out. I was someone that let clients, let other people tell me my own story. And it took me many years to figure out that my experience, everybody's experience in this room, is unique to themselves. And if you are passionate about your own story, in whatever way you want to be, you can be telling it from a very negative, emotional point of view, but that might resonate with other people. It might be something that you can kind of, connect with other people. But I think finding that in myself allowed me to then, tell other people, this is who I am, this is what I do. It doesn't always have to be so strict either. This is where, from the previous question, this allows me to kind of work for different clients and to open the style out to doing a Wes Anderson film poster, for example. There's no Sri Lankan references in a Wes Anderson in the Grand Budapest Hotel, but because of the style being busy compositions as well as Sri Lankan references and talking about mental health, the busy compositions element is the thing I took to that project, So the reason I was talking about the different stylistic things I was influenced by and mixing them with the emotional things that I was influenced by, it allows me to then apply many different options to different clients when they came in. So have a set of influences, have a set of experiences, but allow them to widen and kind of constrain depending on the client. And, if I get approached by a gin company that wants to do something based around South Asia, more of my Sri Lankan heritage will start weighing its way into that design process. Whereas if I was approached by a sneaker company or a brand to kind of do something more about psychedelia and color, I can do that, So I think I went way off on your question, but I hope I answered it a little bit.
Fantastic. Anyone got any other hands up? High as we can so we can see them, please. Yeah, we've got a couple.
Hi. I was just interested to understand a little bit more about how you got yourself out there, how you got yourself noticed. So, you know, from pre-COVID, through COVID, finding that style, but then actually, how did you promote yourself? How was the work being noticed before the big projects came in?
Thank you for asking that question. This is all the practical stuff that I didn't include in my talk, so I appreciate it. I am incredibly tenacious online with finding work. I spend a lot of time on Instagram and on Twitter and on LinkedIn, and I am not annoying to the clients in any way, but I am making note of who these clients are, not necessarily the Instagram page for the brand, but the art directors who work for that brand. You can find them all on LinkedIn or on Instagram. It's really, really simple. If you see Empire Magazine, for example, whenever they post an image of their cover, they will say who the art director is, they'll say who the deputy art director is, and then who the cover artist is. So from there, you'll be able to find the contact details that you need to contact the right clients. So I did that during those early years. I was doing that for a long time. I'd post an image. I'd share the collaborators that I worked with as well so that other people could know. And then throughout this process, I did have agents as well, illustration agents. And to get the attention of the illustration agent, the illustration agent is interested in some level of consistency, some level of approach. I remember being asked by an agent, what is your work about? And I said, oh, my work's colorful, it's psychedelic, she was like, no, what is it actually about? And I only just discovered that recently. The word that I haven't included in this talk is because I only discovered it like last week. The work's about identity. It's not about anything else, really. If you're able to, by the end of a longer process of discovering aesthetics, style, approach, emotions, you should be able to pinpoint all of the work down to like 1 or 2 words. And if you can do that, then you can sell it to lots of people. People get it. It's like when you pitch a movie, they call it the elevator pitch. This movie is, which one is it? Jordan Peele's Nope is Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It's Jaws meets Close Encounters. That's what that movie is, with a little other stuff as well. But if you can, pinpoint your work down to like 1 or 2 words by the end of this kind of long process of a few years of figuring it out, you'll be unstoppable.
Fantastic answer, thank you. Anyone else got any questions? There were a couple from the last one. Hands nice and high for us. We've got Ben in the corner.
Hi. So my question is that, like, previously you mentioned that your parents were like quite against you going this certain route, and I just wanted to ask, like, what are their views on you now with like creating all this art and everything?
They're still not that interested.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
But I stopped doing it for them a long time ago. I think I stopped doing this stuff for anybody else a long time ago. Once I started doing it for me and for my own pleasure and for my own interest, that's when I was able to then be proud and be confident and be able to apply this work to lots of different clients and contact people. My parents are like, they're just happy that I'm working, which is great. But they come from a different world, So sadly, I had to kind of like let that side of me go. And I think it's part of growing up a little bit. I think it's part of like developing as a human being. You can kind of be more confident in yourself and kind of build your own life around this kind of house that you've built for yourself. So yeah, sadly, every now and again, I'll call my dad and he'll be like, "What are you up to right now?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm working on this and this." He's like, "Oh, that's great. Okay, cool." And that's it. But that's okay.
Cheers.
No worries.
Awesome.
Hi, Murugiah. Thanks for the talk. It's really, really, really great.
Thank you.
Question is, so you trained as an architect for 7 years, and then
7 long years.
and then almost retrained as a graphic design illustrator. Was there much of a learning curve, or was it quite transferable?
I had no training as an illustrator or graphic designer. What I did was, after the 7 years of architecture, which taught me so much. Architecture, as much as I'm talking about how long the course is, it is an amazing course for teaching you about. The main thing it teaches you about is positive and negative space in every sense of the word. You tend to understand how to balance things on a page, especially when you're designing a building for a site. You have to consider so many things. So architecture taught me that, but it also, part of my course, I had to present my design projects in the form of presentations on a wall. So I had to print loads of stuff out and make sure it made sense. I had to make books. All of these skills I then applied to this work. The one thing I forgot to mention is that so when I left, I worked for a year or two, and then obviously, as I said, I didn't have any training as a graphic designer or illustrator, so I wanted some kind of professional training. So I went and worked for a greeting card company for a year and then a restaurant chain for a year, and they were both awful. But they taught me a lot about, again, graphic design, type placement. I was just picking up skills as I went along. I would not advise this approach. I would advise to get as much of these skills as possible now. If you're interested, even if you're not that interested in typography, go to a typography class and or there's plenty of people online who are doing all sorts of classes on YouTube and Skillshare and all these places. Get as much information in as possible, even if at the time it doesn't feel like it's going in, because eventually you'll get to a point where you're like, oh, there's this thing that I learned a while back, which I can now put into my work. So be a sponge, basically. I hope that answered your question.
Awesome. Got one down in the middle.
You folks at the front, please don't be afraid to ask questions.
Thank you for coming. The question I have is, when it comes to a lot of designers and illustrators, they start their story like from quite a young age, not like 17. So, you said at 17 you wanted to do art, but was there like a time before that where you just thought, yeah, I want to pursue like art as my career? Or was it just like, just had a sort of realization?
I think as a child, I don't think I decided, I think I was just doing lots of things that were art related. I watched a lot of movies, and then after watching a movie, I would go spend time in my bedroom kind of redrawing those characters from those movies and stuff. So I think I definitely was, that way inclined and more interested in art. But it wasn't until I got to 17, 18, where I was doing my art A-levels, where I spent most of my time in the art room at school, and I did like mediocre at all the other subjects. So I was kind of like, oh, it looks like I'm more interested in this thing. And so it was around that time. But when I was a young child, it was very much, I could see the patterns. If you look back, you can see the patterns of like, did I spend more time doing this or that? And then that kind of informs how you want to pursue it in the future. So yeah, it was movies that did it basically when I was a kid.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please, I'm happy to answer another.
So you said the way you went out as an illustrator was posting weekly on Instagram and then tagging art not tagging, but trying to get the attention of art directors and I know, people who work in the industry so they can actually see your work.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind if I ask, how did you, if there were any, how did you deal with the negative comments or backlash, people saying that your work isn't good enough? That is one of my questions. And then I have another one. I would like to ask, do you have anybody, as in, who inspired you? Obviously, your work is unique. I'm not saying anything else.
No work is unique, by the way. Everyone's influenced by everyone. So thank you for asking that question. Sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
No, that was it. So negative comments or social media, because we all know that's sometimes really mean. And then artists and inspiration, I guess.
Thank you so much for asking that question. It's a really, really important one. So in this, the reason these styles changed so much was because I was dealing with negative comments in a very bad way. Everyone online will say whatever they want to say, and you should be able to ignore it. But what I was doing during this time was taking those comments and then maybe saying, oh, I should do something different. I should do something different, you know? And I think, again, during COVID, I think the confidence, I was building confidence with that stuff. And after 2019, I basically I just ignored any negative comments. It's very difficult to do, but it was a combination of ignoring those negative comments while also building confidence in work, in my style. So because I was feeling good, and it wasn't about other people telling me the work was looking good, I felt comfortable inside. I was like, oh, I like this. I'm going to do something else that's similar to this. And, you know, I just started to feel comfortable. And I don't know whether that was because I was doing it for a long time or, you know, I think it was just about personally feeling good about the work. So it was a combination of ignoring the comments online, which I still have to do to this day. You know, you'll always get people saying, oh, that's not for me, I don't really like this, I don't like the way he's done that, or I can ignore those things because I had a strong opinion and choice behind making the work myself. So the movie posters is a big example. I make big swings with my movie poster design, and more often than not, it doesn't go, you know, people don't really like them. Some customers don't really like them, but other customers are like, wow, that's a really different choice, a different take. So there's always going to be people on both sides that like and dislike your work. You just have to focus on the people that like it. Stylistic influences. Let's go to this page. So there were a few stylistic influences of old. People like Takeshi Murakami, Cause, Hokusai paintings of old, Tadanori Yoku, the 1960s graphic design and illustration movement of psychedelia and color. All of these things have a very similar kind of background. They're all very bright and colorful and kind of graphic. But other influences were things like mythology, you know, things like architecture. They were very loose, but I was like, how do I take an influence from mythology into my work moving forward? There's a painting on this slide in the far right-hand corner of the River Styx. It's the boat that ferries people that have died, you know, into hell or heaven, I can't remember. But it's the boat that ferries the dead, basically. And I have it? I have my version of that. I illustrated a boat with all of my characters on. They're all happy because they're happy about moving on to the afterlife. So it was my take on that mythological piece. So inspiration-wise, it goes all over. You can see these West African masquerade costumes as well. So it's about combining all of these things. There's like a weird fish creature down here. It's finding all of those things that you like and then finding out who those people were influenced by. And if you go back further enough, a lot of the stuff it comes from similar places. My recommendation for influences is always to go back, keep going back as far as possible until you find something you like. Because the further you go back, the more unique and more interesting it is to people of today, because people don't do their research today. What other influences? Film. I'm massively influenced by film. So whenever I go and see a film now, I used to watch a film and then go, how can I design a film poster for that? That would be amazing. Now I take the meaning of that film, what the filmmakers were intending to make from an emotional point of view, and then I go and make a personal piece about that. So most recently, these guys in the corner, the Daniels, who are about to win Best Picture at the Oscars, I hope, they made a movie about kindness. They made a movie about kindness and the relationship between a mother and a daughter. And then they put all this multiversal stuff around it. So, you know, it's something I identify with. That's why I put it in this slide, like kindness and how we need to be compassionate with one another. So then if I start to make work that feels like that the meaning behind those personal pieces are about compassion and kindness, I'm taking the influence from a film and I'm kind of navigating it and then applying it to a personal piece of work. So don't just look at the surface level of the thing that you're inspired by. Look for the meaning behind it and watch interviews by the people that made it and read articles about the meaning behind that piece of work. And then try and see if that meaning is something you identify with as well, and then go and make a piece of work about that. So influences come from aesthetical and meaningful, two different types. Thank you.
Awesome, fantastic answer there. Any more questions from anyone in the audience? I do want to sneak one in,
Sure,
be a bit
yeah.
cheeky. You did mention a little bit earlier on, and you showed off some line work and sort of idea development. Would you say that sort of the sketching out and sort of doing that composition practically still is really relevant to sort of what you do and how sort of graphic design is as a whole? Because there's a temptation now with all the modern technology and tools available to just jump into software and just create whatever's in your brain. Would you say that sitting down, maybe potentially with the client and with a sketchbook and just drawing ideas and seeing what comes to life, is that still part of your process? And if so, has it helped you anywhere?
It is the most important part of the process. It's the process that is at the beginning of all of this work. I have a sketchbook in my bag that is filled with very loose sketches of compositions. It's how you figure this stuff out. You can't really just go into the computer and just start doing it that way, because you need that time, that room in your mind to kind of draw things by hand and to be like, you end up having more interesting design work if you start it by hand, because you're constantly redoing it by hand. And then, so this stage that is here, this early line work stage, that's after about 10 versions of this on paper. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like I'm figuring out these compositions on paper first, loosely, and then I'm applying them digitally. The digital stuff is a tool. It should always be a tool. It should never be the first thing you go to when you start a design, in my personal opinion. The other thing about designing in sketchbooks is you're designing in a thumbnail. You're designing the size of what an Instagram post would look like on your phone, which is most of the time the output of what this work ends up, where it ends up being nowadays. So you have to design something like this big, and it has to be very impactful from that size. So if you're drawing thumbnails in your sketchbook that big, and you can see what they are at that scale, you'll always come back to that overall composition and look and impact of that thumbnail image. Even if you then take it into the computer and you zoom in and you add loads of details, once you zoom out, you should still be able to see that thumbnail image. It's like when you're designing a logo, for example. Your logo must always work in black and white before it works in any other thing, The reason they do that is because they have to be impactful from a very small scale or from a very far distance. It's the same with poster design, graphics, illustrations. That's the way I feel about it. So, to answer your question, yes, sketching is very important.
Awesome, thank you. Take note. Any more questions for anyone? Wait, we have a couple down at the front.
I wanted to ask, how long did it take from when you like sat down to look at like what styles do I like, what feelings do I want to like incorporate to like when you actually like developed your set style?
It's a really good question. Thank you so much for it. It took, I hate to say it, this is the downer of any kind of Q&A. It takes a long time. It took me, as I say, 2013, 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. It took me that many years to figure it out on paper. And then in the last 2 years, I added meaning to it all. And that's when I was able to do this stuff. So I'm saying you can get there a lot quicker if you figure this stuff out first, and then you develop, and then you work on personal pieces. You'll be able to do it in half the time. But for me, because I didn't have the training, because I didn't have the, I went from architecture to this, it took me a lot longer. But the process is still the same. You figure out what you like aesthetically, what looks good to you, and then you figure out what means good to you, what the motion behind the work you want to make. And then you just start making it. And then, as I said, I did this 1 week at a time, and it took 2 years for this new style to develop, but it was on the back of almost 10 years of figuring it out, in other ways. I'm hoping you can all get there in like 2 to 3 years if you really kind of focus on these ideas, but it's entirely up to you how you kind of want to, push it in whatever direction you want. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. We have one more.
How do you know when to stop, like with the drawing? Like, how do you know when you've done enough?
Yeah, that's a difficult question with this work, isn't it? Because there's a lot on the page. I think, thank you for asking that question. Because of my understanding of positive and negative space, what I mean by positive and negative space is if you look at the image in the far left corner, which has a white background, everything has been placed with enough balance around it. The white is the negative space, the content of the illustration is the positive space, or whatever way you want to look at it. There is a fine balance that you can see between all of the elements. If something looks too close to the other one and it doesn't feel right when you zoom out in that thumbnail thing that I was talking about, you rearrange it so that it does. And I do that with every piece. And then once it starts to feel right, I zoom back out, that thumbnail size, that Instagram phone size. When I zoom back out of the piece and I can tell what it is and it's balanced, then I stop. I definitely have been known to kind of call clients after the deadline and say, hey, I just need to adjust this ever so slightly, but it's always the wrong thing. It's always the wrong choice because I've already made that decision that it's fine and it's done. And the client will always tell you if they want something adjusted, and you can kind of speak to them and say, hey, maybe not, but you're having that conversation with yourself about balance, about composition, and about detail constantly when you're making the work. After I've done my paper drawings, my sketchbook work, and I'm working on the thing on the computer, for example, I am zooming in and out, and I'm looking back at that kind of thumbnail size. But when you're working on, let's go, am I going backwards? Am I going forwards? Whoop. When you're working on a painting, for example, you don't have the luxury of doing that. So the circle one in the far right corner is a canvas painting, and I had to figure that positive and negative space out in sketchbook form before I applied the drawing to canvas. And you can see there's like a big element running along the bottom, there's a big element running along the top, and then the character stands in the middle, and the large gap of yellow in between is quite a large amount of negative space, but because you spend time, you know, looking at it from a small scale, you can see that it's balanced, or it feels balanced. To other people's opinions, it may not be, but it has to be to yours, which is why it links back to having that confidence and comfortability with what you're doing. Another example is this square one in the very center. That one's just filled with stuff, right? And again, the balance comes from where is the large element and where is the large amount of space or clear things that haven't been filled with detail. It's the bottom corner. It's a character whose head is in the corner and stuff's coming out of it. So that feels balanced to me, from my opinion. Again, it's about having the comfortability and confidence to understand what is balanced with positive and negative space. And you do that by looking at things macro and micro. Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic answer, thank you. Anyone else? Oh, Gabby once again.
I'm very much here to answer everything. You can ask me any questions, and I'm happy
I
to
promise this is
answer.
my last question.
Oh, no, please.
Just
Happy
because I
to.
want to know, so you made a promise to yourself by getting workout, you said once every week. Would you still have done that if you felt the work wasn't complete?
At that time, yes, because I was, it was during a time of COVID, and I needed something to, I was in a place where I needed to, I'd been doing it for 10 years and I wasn't getting the results I was looking for. And by putting out a piece a week and letting it go and saying goodbye to it, even if it was unfinished, I was able to move on to the next one. And I think if you're when it's personal work and you spend too much time on it in the early stages, you'll end up just doing one piece for an entire year. I'm doing it right now. I have client work every week, and I've gone from doing personal work all the time to only having one day a week to do personal work. And it's taking a lot longer to get that piece out. And I have lots of different ideas for different pieces of work. But I asked my partner, and she's like, just focus on the one. Just remember what you did during that COVID time. Just focus on one. Get it done. If it doesn't feel unfinished, just put it out there and move on to the next one. It obviously has to be finished to a certain point, you know. It needs to feel like it's finished, much like the compositional thing I was talking about earlier. But I think the more work you do, the more you figure out when something is finished, when something is not. And you can always kind of, the thing is, you can just make more work. You can always, if you keep searching, title of the talk, if you keep searching for new things, you can always start making new things and applying new ideas and techniques to new pieces of work. So to answer your question, get the work to a finished state, put it out there, move on to the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One at the front.
Yes, one from the front.
You said that you've kind of found your style and your voice in what you're creating, and it's very clear to me that since kind of COVID time, you've kind of had a very consistent style in everything you make. It's all very coherent. But would you say that even though you found kind of how and what you want to create, would you say that you still want to kind of further your style and develop it beyond it? Because I feel like if you stay in a point where you're kind of content with your style, it can maybe come to a point where you're stagnant in how you're developing as a graphic designer.
100% true. I told my agents recently, get ready for the lino cut phase, where I'm just going to do black and white drawings for ages. But what will be consistent in those black and white drawings, it'll still be my interest in composition. It'll still be my interest in character design. I think your style, as I was mentioning earlier, can widen and kind of constrain itself as you see fit if you establish a world of work first. You can always go down an avenue. You know, let's say I've built this world, this, you know, mad world of characters and psychedelia and stuff. If I decide to go down a tunnel in that world that's just all black and white and depressing and whatever, I'll just go down it and figure it out and, like, you know, make work in that style for a while. And, you know, an earlier question regarding confidence in clients and stuff, you'll find clients in that way. You have to be very good at learning to say no to things and to let go of things as well. It was the other reason I made personal work week after week, because it allowed me to have that skill in doing a piece of work, moving on to the next thing, because it meant that if I wanted to explore an avenue of black and white lino cuts, I could do, because I kind of built that skill of, like, right, move on to the next thing. So right now, for example, I'm moving into public realm artwork, murals, sculptures. I'm developing a sculpture for a gallery in Greenwich where it's a flower coming out the ground. If I had held on to all of this stuff too closely, I would not know how to figure out that sculpture. So allowing yourself the freedom to be like, okay, I've got this now. If I want to explore canvas paintings, if I want to explore sculptures, different techniques and stuff, I'm allowing myself to do that. When you're doing that exploratory stuff, you can show it. You don't have to show it. You can figure it out yourself before you then publicly share it. But I think some of my favorite artists will always try and do things in different avenues and different styles. And yeah, I think it's good. It's healthy to do that. So thank you for reminding me about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you for that one. Any final questions before we finish up? No, I think we're about there. Well, thank you so much, Murugiah. It has been awesome, an inspiration, and some gorgeous artwork as well. So if we can have one final sort of round of applause for Murugiah.
Thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you guys. So if you want to ask any sort of questions one-to-one, Murugiah will be sticking around for a couple of minutes at the front, so you can head that way. Otherwise, if you want to head back to the atrium, we've got about half an hour until the next graphics talk, which is taking place in Performance Space 2. So if you want to meet us in the atrium in about half an hour, you can register and then head down to Jess Bright. And I will see you there.